The October wind cut through downtown Denver like a blade, carrying the scent of coal smoke and the promise of an early winter. Marcus Thorne pulled his wool coat tighter as he walked the empty streets at 3 in the morning, his polished boots echoing against wet cobblestones. Sleep had abandoned him again, as it had most nights since the accident. The oil wells could pump black gold from the earth day and night, but they couldn't extract the guilt that had settled in his chest like sediment in a reservoir. He had built an empire from nothing, turned barren Colorado land into flowing wealth, but success felt hollow when measured against what he had lost. His wife, Catherine, had died in a carriage accident 2 years ago, thrown from their buggy when a spooked horse bolted during a thunderstorm. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who could predict oil strikes couldn't foresee the lightning that would shatter his world. Marcus walked these streets because they were empty, because here he didn't have to wear the mask of the successful businessman, didn't have to field congratulations on his latest acquisition, or condolences that had grown stale with time. Here he could simply be a man haunted by the sound of splintering wood and his wife's final scream. The train depot loomed ahead, its clock tower marking the late hour. Even at this time, the building hummed with activity as freight trains loaded cargo bound for eastern markets. Marcus often came this way, watching the constant movement of commerce that never slept, never grieved, never questioned the cost of progress. But tonight something was different. On the wooden bench beside the depot's main entrance, barely visible in the dim gaslight, a figure lay curled against the cold. Marcus slowed his pace, squinting through the shadows. It was a woman, young from what he could see, wrapped in a thin shawl that provided little protection against the bitter wind. Her dark hair spilled across the bench's armrest, and her breathing came in small puffs of vapor that dissipated into the night air. He approached cautiously, his businessman's instincts warring with genuine concern. Denver's streets weren't safe at this hour, especially for a woman alone. As he drew closer, he could see she was very young, perhaps 19 or 20, with olive skin and delicate features that spoke of Spanish heritage. Her dress, though clean, was worn thin at the elbows and hem, but it was the gentle curve of her belly beneath the fabric that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. She was pregnant, probably 6 or 7 months along, and sleeping on a bench in the October cold. Marcus stood there for a moment, uncertain. His wealth had insulated him from such stark poverty, and he felt suddenly ashamed of his ignorance. How many others slept on benches while he lay awake in his mansion, wrestling with ghosts? The woman stirred slightly, one hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child, even in sleep, and the gesture undid something in Marcus's carefully constructed defenses. "Miss," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Miss, you can't sleep here." Her eyes opened slowly, dark and wary, scanning his face and expensive clothes with the quick assessment of someone who had learned to judge threats instantly. She sat up with effort, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders, and Marcus saw the wedding ring on her finger, a simple band that caught the gaslight. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that confirmed his guess about her heritage. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll move along." "No, wait," Marcus said, raising his hand gently. "You're not disturbing me. I'm concerned about you sleeping out here in the cold. It's not safe." She studied him with intelligent eyes that held too much knowledge of hardship for someone so young. "You're very kind, Signor, but I have nowhere else to go tonight. Tomorrow, I start work at the Copper Bell Diner, and they said I could rent a room above the kitchen once I've earned my first week's wages." Marcus frowned. "The Copper Bell? That's on the south side, in the roughest part of town." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, tinged with resignation. "It's work, and work is what my baby and I need." She placed both hands over her belly in a protective gesture that reminded Marcus painfully of Catherine during her brief pregnancy, before the miscarriage that had broken both their hearts. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised by his own boldness. "Elena," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Elena Morales. I'm Marcus Thorne." He saw recognition flicker in her eyes at the name, as it did with most people in Denver. The Thorne Oil Company had made him one of the wealthiest men in Colorado, his name appearing regularly in newspaper headlines about new strikes and business deals. Elena's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "I should go, Mr. Thorne. I don't want any trouble." "You're not in trouble," Marcus said quickly, "but I can't leave you out here. There's a boarding house 2 blocks north that's respectable and clean. Let me pay for a room until you can manage on your own." She shook her head firmly. "I cannot accept charity, especially from someone I don't know. My husband always said, a person's dignity is worth more than their comfort." The past tense didn't escape Marcus's notice. "Your husband?" Elena's hand moved unconsciously to the ring on her finger, twisting it with nervous energy. "He died 3 months ago. Cave-in at the silver mine outside Leadville. 22 men went down that day, and only 6 came back up." The simple statement carried a weight of grief that Marcus recognized all too well. He had read about the Leadville disaster in the newspapers, another tragic reminder of how dangerous the pursuit of Colorado's riches could be. But the headlines had been statistics, not stories of pregnant widows left to fend for themselves. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. "But this isn't charity. Consider it an investment in your future. You can pay me back once you're established." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus found himself holding his breath. There was pride in her bearing, dignity despite her circumstances, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Strength, perhaps, or determination. It reminded him of Catherine's quiet courage during her illness, the way she had faced pain without complaint. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally. "You don't know anything about me." Marcus considered the question, unsure how to explain the compulsion that had gripped him the moment he saw her protecting her unborn child. "Because someone should," he said simply. "Because it's cold, and you're alone, and that's not right." The wind picked up, rattling the depot's windows and making Elena shiver despite her attempt to hide it. Marcus could see her resolve wavering, maternal instinct warring with stubborn pride. "One night," she said finally. "I'll accept help for one night, and then I'll find my own way." Marcus nodded, though privately he doubted one night would be enough to set her on stable ground. He offered his arm to help her stand, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that made him want to shield her from every harsh wind and predatory gaze. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Kellerman, a German widow who asked no questions when Marcus paid for Elena's room in advance. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the quiet side street. Elena stood in the doorway, taking in the simple luxury of walls and a roof with something approaching disbelief. "Thank you," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." "Get some rest," Marcus replied. "That's payment enough." He left her there, but found himself walking past the boarding house on his way home, glancing up at the glowing window on the 2nd floor. For the first time in months, his own problems seemed smaller, less consuming. There was something about Elena's quiet dignity that had stirred something he thought had died with Catherine. The next morning found Marcus standing outside the Copper Bell diner at dawn, watching Elena through the grease-stained window as she served coffee to miners and railroad workers. She moved with efficient grace despite her condition, navigating the crowded space with practiced ease. But he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way she paused to steady herself against tables when she thought no one was looking. The diner was everything he had feared it would be, a rough establishment that catered to rougher men. The owner, a barrel-chested man named Sullivan, barked orders with the casual cruelty of someone who knew his employees had nowhere else to go. Marcus watched Sullivan grab Elena's wrist when she moved too slowly with an order, saw her flinch but not pull away, and felt anger rise in his chest like oil under pressure. He pushed through the door, the bell above it clanging harshly. The conversation in the diner died as the well-dressed stranger surveyed the room with cold eyes. Sullivan released Elena's wrist and approached with the false servility of a man who recognized money when he saw it. "Mr. Thorne," Sullivan said, his voice oozing false respect, "what brings you to my humble establishment?" Marcus ignored him, walking directly to Elena. Up close, he could see the purple shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," she replied, but her voice was strained. "Thank you again for last night. I've arranged to rent the room upstairs starting next week." Marcus glanced around the diner, noting the stained walls, the broken window pane repaired with cardboard, the way the other customers stared at Elena with varying degrees of interest and speculation. This was no place for a pregnant woman, especially one as vulnerable as Elena appeared to be. "I have a proposition," he said, ignoring Sullivan's hovering presence. "I need someone to manage my household staff. My housekeeper retired last month, and I haven't found a suitable replacement. The work would be lighter than this, the pay better, and there are quarters for live-in staff." Elena's eyes widened. "Mr. Thorne, I couldn't possibly—" "You could," Marcus interrupted gently. "And you should, for your baby's sake, if not your own." Sullivan stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now, see here, Thorne. This girl owes me money for training," and Marcus turned on him with such sudden intensity that the bigger man stepped back involuntarily. "How much?" $20, Sullivan said, though his voice had lost some of its bluster. Marcus pulled out his wallet and counted out $25, placing them on the nearest table. "There. Any debt is paid with interest. Miss Morales is free to leave whenever she chooses." The silence in the diner was complete. Elena stared at the money, then at Marcus, her dark eyes unreadable. He could see the war playing out across her features, pride battling with practicality, independence warring with the undeniable reality of her situation. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Marcus replied. "I'll be at my office if you decide you're interested." He left the diner without another word, but he couldn't shake the image of Elena surrounded by leering men and grease smoke trying to protect both her dignity and her unborn child in a place that respected neither. It was past sunset when his butler informed him that a young woman was at the door, asking to speak with him. Marcus found Elena standing in his foyer, still wearing her diner uniform, but holding herself with quiet determination. The electric lights of his mansion cast warm shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate bone structure and the strength he was beginning to recognize as her defining characteristic. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said without preamble, "and I need to understand why you're making it." Marcus gestured toward his study, a room lined with books and maps that showed the extent of his oil holdings. Elena perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded carefully over her belly. "Honestly," Marcus said, settling behind his desk, "I'm not entirely sure myself. I saw you on that bench, and something about the way you protected your child, even while sleeping, reminded me of my wife." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're married?" "I was. Catherine died 2 years ago in a carriage accident. She was pregnant at the time." The words came out more easily than they had in months, as if Elena's quiet presence had somehow made them less painful to speak. "I'm sorry," Elena said simply, and Marcus could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been very difficult." "It was. Still is." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that marked his empire. "I built all of this thinking it would matter, that success would somehow shield the people I loved from harm. But money can't stop spooked horses or shore up mine tunnels or cure loneliness." He turned back to find Elena watching him with something that might have been understanding. "So when you saw me, you saw your wife. I saw someone who needed help, and I saw an opportunity to do something that actually mattered." Marcus returned to his chair, leaning forward earnestly. The job offer is real, Elena. I do need a housekeeper, and the work would be far easier than what you're doing now. But I'll be honest with you. Part of this is selfish. This house has been empty too long, and I think we could help each other." Elena was quiet for several minutes, her fingers tracing patterns on the chair's armrest. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband used to say that pride was a luxury we couldn't afford, that there was no shame in accepting help when it was offered with a good heart." He sounds like a wise man. He was. Elena's hand moved to her wedding ring again, the gesture Marcus was beginning to recognize as a touchstone for difficult decisions. "If I accept this position, it would be as your employee, nothing more. I won't be anyone's charity case or mistress." The directness of her statement caught Marcus off guard, but he appreciated her honesty. "Of course. You would have your own quarters, your own space. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Elena nodded slowly. "Then I accept, Mr. Thorne, with gratitude." The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elena proved to be far more than a simple housekeeper. She managed the household staff with quiet efficiency, organized Marcus's chaotic schedule, and somehow made the vast mansion feel like a home again. She moved through the rooms with growing confidence, her pregnancy becoming more pronounced as October gave way to November. Marcus found himself looking forward to their brief conversations in the morning when she brought him coffee, or the moments when he caught her humming Spanish lullabies while arranging flowers. There was a grace to her movements, a strength that became more apparent as she settled into her new environment. She never complained about her condition or asked for special consideration, but Marcus noticed how she favored certain chairs, how she sometimes pressed her hand to her lower back when she thought no one was watching. It was during one of Denver's first snowfalls that everything changed. Marcus was working late in his study when he heard a cry from upstairs, sharp and unmistakably distressed. He took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound to Elena's quarters. He found her sitting on the edge of her bed, doubled over in pain, her face pale and drawn. "Elena, what's wrong?" "I think," she gasped, "I think something's happening with the baby. It's too early." Marcus felt ice form in his veins, memories of Catherine's miscarriage flooding back with devastating clarity. But Elena needed him now, needed him to be strong, rather than paralyzed by past tragedy. "Can you walk? We need to get you to a doctor." Elena nodded, allowing him to help her stand. The journey to Dr. Henley's office was the longest of Marcus's life, Elena gripping his hand as waves of pain washed over her. The elderly physician examined her with gentle thoroughness, while Marcus paced the outer room like a caged animal. "False labor," Dr. Henley announced finally, his voice carrying relief. "Common in women under stress. The baby is fine, but Miss Morales needs complete rest for the next few weeks." The ride home was quiet, Elena exhausted from the ordeal, and Marcus shaken by how close he had come to losing her. It wasn't until they were back in his study, Elena resting on the sofa with a blanket tucked around her, that he realized how much she had come to mean to him. "I was terrified," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "When I heard you cry out, when I thought something might happen to you or the baby." Elena looked at him with tired eyes that held a new kind of awareness. "You care about us." It wasn't a question, and Marcus didn't treat it like one. "Yes, more than I should, probably." "Why shouldn't you care?" Elena's voice was soft but steady. "Caring is what makes us human." Marcus knelt beside the sofa, his face level with hers. "Because caring means risking loss, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that again." Elena reached out and touched his cheek with gentle fingers. "My husband used to say that the only thing worse than losing someone you love is never having loved them at all." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Marcus covered her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse at her wrist. "Elena, I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." But I'm still mourning my husband, and you're still mourning your wife. Maybe we can mourn together and see where that leads us." December brought the worst blizzard in Denver's recorded history, trapping the city under 3 feet of snow for nearly a week. Marcus's mansion became an island of warmth and light in the white wilderness, and he found himself grateful for the isolation that forced him and Elena into closer proximity. They spent long evenings by the fireplace, Elena mending baby clothes, while Marcus read aloud from books of poetry and adventure stories. Slowly, carefully, they began to share their pasts. Elena told him about her childhood in New Mexico, her marriage to Roberto Morales, a gentleman who worked the mines to save money for a small farm. Marcus spoke of building his business from nothing, of the loneliness that success had brought, of Catherine's laughter and the silence that followed her death. It was during one of these evenings that Elena felt the baby kick for the first time, a strong movement that made her gasp and press both hands to her belly. Marcus looked up from his book, concerned, until he saw the wonder on her face. "The baby," she breathed. "It's moving." Without thinking, Marcus set aside his book and moved to kneel beside her chair. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering uncertainly over her belly. Elena nodded, guiding his hand to the spot where the movement had been strongest. For a moment there was nothing, and then Marcus felt it, a strong push against his palm, as if the baby was announcing its presence to the world. "My God," he whispered, awed by the miracle of life beneath his hand. "It's so strong." Elena covered his hand with both of hers, and they sat like that in the firelight, connected by the promise of new life. When Marcus looked up, he found tears streaming down Elena's face. "Roberto never got to feel this," she said quietly. "He died 2 weeks before the baby started moving." Marcus felt the weight of that loss, the cruel timing that had robbed a man of one of parenthood's greatest joys. "I'm sorry he's not here to share this with you." "He is, in a way," Elena replied, her hand moving to the wedding ring she still wore. "But Marcus, I need you to know that what I'm feeling for you doesn't diminish what I felt for him. The heart isn't a finite space. Love doesn't subtract. It multiplies." The words were exactly what Marcus needed to hear, permission to care without betraying Catherine's memory. He brought Elena's hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you and your baby, and I want to take care of you both." Elena's smile was radiant through her tears. "And I love you, Marcus Thorne. I love your kindness, your strength, the way you see past my circumstances to who I really am." The wedding took place on a crisp January morning, just the two of them, and a justice of the peace in the mansion's parlor. Elena wore a simple blue dress that accommodated her growing belly, and Marcus had never thought any woman more beautiful. She kept Roberto's ring on her right hand, a sign of respect for her first love that Marcus not only accepted, but encouraged. As winter gave way to spring, Elena's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Marcus converted one of the mansion's smaller rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling it with toys and furniture. He read every book on childbirth and infant care he could find, determined to be prepared for anything. The baby came on a warm April evening, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, but healthy and strong. Dr. Henley delivered her in the master bedroom while Marcus paced the hallways below, every cry from upstairs making his heart race. When the doctor finally appeared with news of a healthy daughter, Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. Elena was exhausted but radiant when he was finally allowed to see her, the baby nursing contentedly at her breast. "She's perfect," Elena whispered, touching the infant's dark hair with gentle fingers. Marcus approached slowly, overwhelmed by the sight of mother and child. The baby was tiny but alert, her dark eyes seeming to focus on his face with curious intelligence. "What will you name her?" Elena looked up at him with eyes full of love and gratitude. "I was thinking Esperanza. It means hope." "Esperanza Thorne," Marcus said, tasting the name. "It's perfect." Elena smiled. then grew serious. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone." He settled beside her on the bed, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "What is it?" "My real name isn't Elena," she said quietly. "It's Esperanza. Elena was my grandmother's name, the one I used when I was afraid and needed to hide." She looked down at her daughter, then back at Marcus. "But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not hiding. I'm Esperanza Morales Thorne, and this is my daughter, and you are my husband, and we are home." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes as he gathered his wife and daughter into his arms. Outside, spring rain pattered against the windows, washing the last of winter's snow from the city streets. Inside, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, bound together by love that had grown from loneliness into something beautiful and strong. The newspapers would indeed write about Marcus Thorne's unexpected marriage to a pregnant widow, but they could never capture the real story. How 2 wounded souls had found healing in each other, how a chance encounter on a cold bench had blossomed into a love that honored the past while embracing the future. In a world that too often forgot the power of simple kindness, theirs was a reminder that sometimes the greatest headlines are written not in ink, but in the quiet courage of hearts willing to love again.